And due to, I'd say, reality, the one we're living in these days, actually, before we jump into your book, I kind of want to ask you what it's like for you right now in Israel, what it's like being an author in Israel, especially as so much of what we're seeing and people expressing is, I have no words. This is beyond words, and being a person of words. How is that? How does that feel?
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be with you. Actually, most of you have your cameras off, and I wish you would turn them on because then I would feel less alone. And I want to talk about, emotional stuff. And yeah, that's better. Now I feel that I'm among human beings. So thank you for that. And back to your question, well, it's a very, as you probably know, it's a very difficult time now in Israel. I I just came from Tel Aviv. We had like 3 or 4 sirens going between 9 and 9:30. And it's not only the sirens. I think what I realized after a couple of days after the October 7, the whole country in a way is post-traumatic. Each one with his own level of PTSD. You have, of course, the people who were wounded, the people who lost their loved ones, the people who their loved ones were kidnapped. This is one level, but even the people around me, my friends, family, students, everyone is post-traumatic in a way. And the thing I'm basically doing now for a month is healing. I feel more like a healer than a writer, and I'm doing this healing through words, either enabling other people to write. We have an open space every night, 9 p.m. for hundreds of people who want to express their feelings, and I moderate it, and sometimes teachers from my writing school. So I'm enabling other people to express their feelings. I'm also working with children, doing events for children and parents, reading my children books, talking with children, talking with parents. One of the parents asked me in one of the events, he asked me, what is your advice for children? Like, how would you cope with fear? What do you want to tell children about coping with fear and coping with the situation in general? And I thought to myself, well, okay, I'm not an expert, but two things came to my mind. I thought sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help other people. So I told the children, if you have a kid brother, or if you have someone in your family that needs help, helping him will help you. And the other thing I mentioned is using your imagination, because the present time in Israel is almost impossible emotionally. So going back to the past, remembering, imagining a better future. This is basically what I'm doing with children and also with adults. I'm doing events with my books, but I'm specifically choosing stories that have a healing effect, that can touch people's heart in a way that can help them to cope with the situation. And also, I'm working with people who are now in hotels. They lost their homes. They can't. Their homes were burned. Their homes were bombed, and they are living in a hotel. So I come to the hotels and I read stories, and usually I bring a musician with me. It's not an easy experience because the people are completely post-traumatic. They are pale in this very strong kind of way, which is not COVID pale. It's like post-trauma pale. And I'm working with them. And I guess what is missing in this description is writing, because I'm not writing. I'm a writer who is not writing for a month. I'm really invested in this project of healing, because this is what I feel is the most important thing to do right now. I just came back today. We opened a writing course, a creative writing course. We had a lot of hesitation before, not knowing whether it's the right time to do it, not knowing if people would come, will actually want to participate. And eventually we had 16 out of 16 coming. We had people writing and reading and sharing, and the feeling was elevating in a way I still have to kind of analyze with myself. It was a really, I've been teaching for 22 years now, and it was one of the most powerful classes I had ever. The class ended at 9 p.m. We said our last sentence and like goodbye everybody, and then we had a siren and we went to the shelter together, which was very good for the bonding of the class. And so this is the time I'm living in. Healing is the project, and people of words and artists, maybe we can make our contribution. Right now, by the way, I'm speaking with you from a room that I share with a psychologist. This is the proof. This is my living proof. She meets with people on afternoons. I work here at mornings and nights, and then I have this with me. And I recently, in the last 4 weeks, I feel like I'm more a healer than a writer. So that was a long answer to your short question, but yeah, this is our life now.
Yeah, no, I think it's important, and I think it's gonna come up and reemerge in our conversation, but I will pivot now to the book, which, by the way, looks like this in Hebrew, and looks like that in English. Other way around, you're upside down. And we're also going to talk about the different names that the book has in Hebrew and English. But before we do so, I want us to the book is comprised of 3 separate stories that have some kind of intersection. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna share like a few sentences about the first story. I'll ask you, Eshkol, to read a piece of that so that you can know what's going on here, a moment of it, and then we'll dive into questions, and that's how we're going to go through the 3 parts of the book. So the first part, and Eshkol, what I did, I actually didn't take the blurbs as they're written, but rather kind of wrote my own little blurb so that you can protest if you don't like the blurb. So in the first story, the protagonist roles shift between a freshly divorced man and a young woman on her honeymoon that cross paths in South America. One is exploring his newfound freedom. The other is discovering bounds beyond what she imagined as what should have been a romantic post-wedding trip turns completely different. And the reader discovers each of these stories as they are revealed through the meetings of these 2 characters and their conversations. And if you can read a piece of this first story, and then we'll go into questions.
Actually, I think it's the first time I'm reading the English version out loud. So I hope I can find my rhythm. Opening paragraph of this story. My lawyer said that even if we decide to lie in court, we should be sure about the truth. And the best thing would be for me to write down the events exactly the way they happened. So here goes. Until that moment, I had never seen a picture in the paper of someone I knew dead. I know that's pretty incredible in this country with all the wars and so-called military operations that are actually wars. At some point, you're likely to open the newspaper and come across a picture of someone who was a schoolmate or army buddy. But no, somehow I managed to get halfway through my life without having that experience. And maybe that's why the chills running down my spine were so intense. We usually say chills because we can't find a more precise word, but I really did feel cold between my shoulders, all the way down to my tailbone. I totally froze when I saw the small picture, which wasn't on the front page, but on one of the last ones facing the obituary page. I didn't have to look twice. It was him. We'd only spent a few hours together in La Paz, Bolivia, but his face was etched in my memory. The chiseled nose, the eyes, you can tell were blue, even in the black and white newspaper photo, the goatee that looked like a monk's beard. The short piece under the picture told the story of Ronen Amirov, a 28-year-old Israeli trekker who was killed in an accident on the death road in Bolivia while on his honeymoon. The bicycle he was riding, it said, veered off the road and plunged into the chasm. His wife, Mo Amirov, who was with him when it happened, called for help, but by the time the rescue crew arrived, he was already dead. His body was being transported to Israel, and the funeral would be held sometime in the next few days. Okay? This is the beginning, and the minute he reads this article in the newspaper, he suspects that it's not the truth. It's not the full truth. He feels something is wrong about this description, and this is how the story begins.
So I actually want to also start with, it starts with death, which actually runs through the course of the whole book, and comments very clearly on the surprising fact that the protagonist hasn't encountered death in his life in that way yet. Was that the original start of the story? Did it come like later, because it places like death as another character in the book almost?
Well, actually, the biographical events that triggered this story resembles what happens to the character. I was sitting in my house and I was reading the newspaper, and I ran into this article about an Israeli killed in Bolivia, and I knew the guy. And I was stunned, I was astonished, I was devastated, and I also felt that something was wrong. Something was not, I had my own thoughts about it. And this is how the story started in my mind. And later on, of course, it developed outside my biography. It became much more dramatic and bold. But it started with this kind of wonder, like what really happened there. By the way, in real life, I was not able to find out. The family did not let me in, and it is still a riddle. Like I still don't know what is the real story behind this, but I had to invent one in order to give an explanation.
In this story, and this is again true for all three parts, but I'd say there are quite a few relationships that are happening. There's the man and woman, there's father and daughter, there's siblings, they're friends. And although the driving force is the man-woman relationship, at the end, the decisive one is the father-daughter relationship. So I was wondering if you can talk a little, first of all, also the biographical side of you as a father and how that plays in, and also the way your decisions of positioning these roles almost one against each other.
First of all, relationships are my thing. This is what I'm interested in. When I started working with my editor in Israel on this book, I told her, look, this book has mechanisms of a thriller. Actually, the American cover kind of leads you to that direction. And it's a very intense book. There's a lot of plot turns and dramatic moments. But when we started working on the book, I told my editor, look, we are going to use mechanisms of a thriller, but we shouldn't forget that this book is about relationships. I'm not really interested in the classic thriller question, who done it? That's not my big fascination as a writer. I'm interested in what happens between a man and a woman, what triggers, in what way a woman can trigger a man can trigger a woman. A father can be triggered by his daughter, his ex-wife. These are the issues that I'm really interested in writing about. And yes, you mentioned the fact that the decisive moment like comes from parenthood. I'm a father of 3 daughters, and one is 19. She's in the army now, and I'm kind of worried because of her. The last phone conversation I had before going to this Zoom meeting, it was with her, like to hear that she's okay. Maybe she's coming back for the weekend. And the second daughter is 17, and the small one is 12. And I think not in a way that resembles the narrative of this story, because this is how fiction works. It's not a replication of real life, but the issue of in what way are you willing to compromise or willing to make decisions because of your daughters? Like what is important? What is more important? Yourself, your daughters? When is the right moment to say, okay, I'm going to do my thing, even if my daughters would pay a price? And when is the right moment to say, okay, this is my line. I'm like my red line. It's not going to be crossed because I care about my daughter too much, so much. There are things that I would not do. And the main character only in this story, it ends up with a decision that he has to make: a woman or my daughter, love or parenthood. And I guess we'll let the readers discover what is he going to choose.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna move to the next one and kind of reveal more questions that I think are relevant for all of them, but it's nice to use the different parts of the story. So in the second part, there's a senior doctor at a Tel Aviv hospital who is inexplicably drawn to a young female resident. His late wife and relationship with his 2 children frame him as a loving husband turned widow and a caring father, as he shifts between the urge to protect this resident and a sense of attraction towards her. So if you can read a little bit from that story, and then we'll...
Hey, with joy. The lawyer suggested that I write my version of the events. Try to stick to the facts, he said. The committee isn't interested in feelings. Outside my window, evening is turning into night. The house is empty. There are no children's voices coming from the living room, no water flowing over Niva's body in the shower. Schubert sonates are playing in the background, the volume low. If I have to confess, this is the time. At first, she was just one of many doctors doing their residency, perhaps a bit better looking than most, perhaps a bit brighter than most, but I didn't give her special treatment. It occurs to me that now that once I even rebucked her. The entire group was standing around a patient's bed, and I asked Liat to give a brief summary. She spoke clearly, confidently, and that itself put me off. I'll stop here. And what I can say for now is that this story is going to develop in a different direction than what you expect. This is okay, my lips are sealed.
Mine won't be. I'll try
no
not
more information.
Spoilers. I'll try not to, but there might be a few spoilers. I do want to start with this question of like having this story too, starting with the lawyer and kind of the character having to detail an account in that way. So if you can say a little more about that.
Actually, the book is made out of 3 monologues. The third part is also a monologue that is actually directed at a policeman. And the question is that when we confess, even think of a confession cell in a church. When we confess, is a confession the truth? And this question, is the narrator reliable? And I think I'm playing with it because they are speaking their own truth, but is it the only truth? Maybe it's possible to see the same story through the doctor's eyes and also maybe through the intern's eyes. Maybe she would tell a different story. So I generally speaking, in all my books, I like to play with that. Like, don't trust me or the characters or the narrator. Don't trust us 100%. There's always a possibility to see the story from a different angle. And it goes through all the parts of the book, and in a way it unites them. One of the alternative names we had for this book was versions, because we have 3 versions of the truth and 3 versions of relationships, and maybe each one of them is a part of this triangle, Bermuda Triangle.
So I want to ask you a little about the gender roles. And I think it's applicable again to the various stories, but in this one, very, very much so. With very often the male characters, things are kind of happening to them, and the women are more like, I'd say, even when they're victims, they have more agency in a way, or at least it seemed to me that way, that the male characters are kind of, reacting to things that are happening to them, kind of not fully responsible for their own actions. So I was wondering what you think about that, if that's a reading you recognize within your characters.
Well, I like your interpretation. I would say that I grew up with a very proactive mother, still proactive. She has a lot to say, and she wants to do a lot. She's 82 now, and she's all over the place. This is my mother, and I have a very powerful, dominant, charismatic wife, and I have 3 daughters. Each one of them has her own presence, strong presence in our house. So this is my surroundings. I guess it affects my writing, affects the way I see women. Even though in this specific book, I think I'm going even beyond gender boundaries. I think the book was published 2.5 years ago in Israel. And I think now I have the perspective that I didn't have when it was published in Hebrew. I think the way my daughters perceive the world, the way they talk about gender differences, gender fluidness, the possibilities when it comes to the way you define your gender, and also sexual tendencies, the possibilities, the variety of possibilities in their generation, the way Me Too affected, the Me Too revolution affected the way they think about their own bodies. I think this got into my writing. So in the end, and when I say in the end, it's also connected to the end of the book, the gender roles are completely mixed. Like feminine becomes masculine, masculine becomes feminine. You don't even know who's a man and who's a woman. And so I guess it is a story that deals with gender issues, but in the end, it offers a very, I would say, liberal or bold vision about the future. I think the choices I make, the last pages of the book are completely mixing it in a way that maybe this is the world that my daughters would grow into.
So I'm gonna before we get to the third one, I do want to ask, and you mentioned it, and I had this also in my questions, because in light of the Me Too movement, the second story is almost bold in terms of it's kind of I'd say it's unclear. There's a lot of gray, uncomfortable area in that story, which is actually very different from I'd say the hard line of kind of the Me Too movement. And I was wondering if it's based on a real story. And I was also wondering if you had any thoughts about that plot and how, like, was there a temptation to close it more clearly? Was it difficult to allow it to be kind of relatively blurry in terms of the plot line?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Me Too revolution. As a father of daughters, I'm very happy about it. I bless it. I wake up and I say thank you that I'm living in this era, that my daughters have such confidence in their rights, on their own bodies. As a writer, it's what I'm interested are the gray areas, because we still have so many gray areas. There are clear-cut cases where people should go to jail and should feel completely shameful, and these are clear-cut cases, and they go to jail, and at least they are banned. But still, between men and women, there are so many gray areas, so many misunderstandings, so many drives happening in a moment, in one date. In one date, you have so many moments of awkwardness, of embarrassments, of misunderstanding, because the minute you put two people together into an intimate situation, you're bound to have question marks more than definite answers. So these are the areas I want to write about. And the story of Dr. Caro and his intern, Liat Ben Arbo, is a story full of question marks, because there's a lot of opportunities to read this story, and I wanted to leave it open. I guess it is still, when I think about my writing and my future writing, I think this is exactly the things I want to write about, because these things are not discussed. You have strong texts talking about clear-cut cases, and you have many writers, especially in the United States, they're afraid to write about these issues because maybe they would get it wrong, politically correct wise. In Israel, we don't have so much politically correct, so this is what I'm fascinated about. And actually, I got fascinating responses from people all around the world reading this story, each one in a different way, each culture in a different way. It's not based on a real story, but it's based on my accumulative experience as a man and as a person living in this world surrounded by male friends and female friends, and witnessing so many moments of embarrassment and questions that are full of pain, but they don't fall into the definition of black and white, of jail, kind of go to jail. No, it's more complicated, and this is what I want to write about.
Thank you. So we're gonna continue to the third part, where we'll also have time. I'm seeing some questions coming in also about translation and stuff, and we'll have time for that. In the third story, a married couple go out for their regular morning walk in the orchards of the outskirts of town. The man walks into the orchards for a moment and disappears without a trace. And the story takes the reader through the relationships between the mother and her two children, as well as the sibling relationship. as they try to find out what happened to their father and where he disappeared to. So if you can read a piece of that.
Actually, I want to tell you how this story came to my mind, because this is a very specific birth moment. Real story. There's a big orchard, a large orchard between the city I live in, Ra'anana, and a moshav, a small kind of neighborhood, which is 1 kilometer from us. And there's a huge, really large orchard. And my wife and I, we take Saturday morning walks into the orchard, and we specifically love going there at this time of the year, November, December, January. There are oranges, grapefruits. And usually these walks, these Saturday morning walks, are boring. This is their charm, is that they're boring. And we've been doing this since my first daughter was born. She's 20 now, so we've been doing this walk for 20 years. And then while writing this book, I had already the two first parts were already written. It was COVID, lockdown, and then another lockdown, and then there was this gap between lockdowns, and we were allowed to go outside. And we went to our orchard walk, boring, the same orchard walk we've been doing for years. Nothing happens. And then we finished the walk. Actually, we went all the way, we came back to our car, and then we saw a woman crying. And it was not as kind of melancholic tears, it was more hysterical. So we asked her what happened, and she said, my husband was with me, and then he said, I want to go inside the orchard, and he left his keys and his cell phone, and he said, I'm coming back in a minute, and it didn't come back. And then we asked her, do you want us to help you? And she said yes, and we got into the orchard, and we were looking for him, and then we couldn't find him, so we called our other people, and then we had this whole operation of looking for this guy. And after an hour, we had to go home. I returned home. I was looking into websites to find out what happened. It's Israel, anything can happen. Maybe he was kidnapped, maybe he had a heart attack, maybe it was something else. Till this day, I don't know what really happened. The book was a huge bestseller in Israel. I met thousands of people in readings. I always tell this story, and I have this secret kind of, maybe I'm hoping that someone would raise his hand and say, hey, it's me. Maybe it will happen today in this Zoom session. I don't know. Maybe it's one of you, but till now, I don't know the real story. But I had to find an explanation. It triggered me. My storytelling drives were triggered, and I had to find an explanation. What would make a man around my age why? Why did he tell his wife that he's going just for a minute? What did she do before? And what happened afterwards? And I had to solve this riddle through the story. And I actually started writing without knowing the end, without knowing the solution, just discovering through the story what are the secrets that my characters are hiding from each other, and also maybe from me. And this is how the story was written. I was writing it in a very intense way, like a reader who wants to discover what happens in the end. Maybe one of my most intense writing experience ever.
Thank you. So I have a question. Can you read for us a part of the story that isn't the beginning?
Yeah. Let's go.
Now I'm curious what you'll choose.
Let's go into the orchard. We want to go into the pardes, right? That's why we met today. So let's go into the pardes. And let me find it. After a year, she has this dream and she wakes up and she knows where to go and she's coming back.
It's his wife.
Yeah, his wife. Thank you. His wife is coming back to the orchard and there's a party in the orchard. The party is already very close. Reach out and touch it. The bass guitars set the rotten fruit on the ground dancing. And I quicken my steps but move forward more slowly, my pants stretched on me as if I'm running, but everything is in slow motion. And then the scene cuts to a panther or someone dressed as a panther standing at the end of the path who asks me for the code, but I have no idea what is it. And he asked me for the code once again, and I try Frida Kahlo, and he shakes his head, and I try Puo Chayon, and he shakes his head and tells me I have one more chance, and I try Pursue a lead, and he shakes his head, and I have no leads, so I say, I'll come from the other direction. What can you do to me? And he says, there's someone like me at every entrance. And I ask, are they all dressed as panthers? Or is each one a different animal? But he doesn't smile and says, I'm sorry. And he says, lady, this is a private party.
Thank you. So I'll start with this story saying that it's also the most fantastical one. It takes twists and turns that are unrealistic. And was that something you anticipated when you started? 'Cause it's very different in that way from the other two.
No, this is actually the magical moments in writings are the moments that you lose control. The characters decide for themselves where do they want to go, how do they want to progress, and they went into the orchard. Maybe it's the right moment to talk about the meaning of the word orchard, pardes, in the Jewish culture. Because the minute I understood I'm going into the orchard, the whole book, not only this story, the whole book got organized again through this Talmudic story, which I don't know if everyone knows this, if everyone is.
I'll just say I just put the story in the chat so that
Wow.
For those of you who don't know, you can take a look.
Beautiful. I will tell you the short and simple version. 4 scholars enter the orchard, and only Rabbi Akiva survives. The other 3, either one is dead, one gets crazy, and one stops believing in God. And this is one of the most beautiful story in the Jewish culture because 4 people are going through the same experience, the same orchard, but the response is completely different. And what is the orchard? What is this metaphor? There's a lot of interpretations. Some interpretations talk about the Kabbalah. Entering the orchard is actually like studying Kabbalah. If you're not ready, you might get hurt. It might be too much for you. Other interpretations talk about being in the presence of God. The only one in the Bible which is allowed to be in the presence of God is Moses. If you're not ready, if you're not in the level of Moses, you cannot stand being in the presence of God. And because of that, only Rabbi Akiva survived this experience. Now, going into more secular interpretations, think about drugs, hallucinative drugs. I just read a beautiful nonfiction book by an American writer. I think his name is Michael Pollan, and the title is How to Change Your Mind. And he's writing about mushrooms and LSD. And for some people, these drugs can be salvation. They are now practiced by psychologists, and research is supporting the fact that LSD can heal depression. But for other people, the same drug, the same experience could be devastating. They could lose their mind forever. I know people that went through these experiences in while backpacking in South America. Some of them were enlightened, some of them did not recover from this experience till this day. So this Talmudic story has so much wisdom in it, and I was entering the orchard, feeling again this magical atmosphere of the Kabbalah and the Talmudic wisdom. And I think this is what brought me into this kind of more surrealistic or open ending of the book. And today, when I think about this book in perspective, now it's been 2.5 years. The whole book is in a way a homage to this Talmudic story. 4 characters entering this orchard, whether the orchard is love, danger, attraction, and let's see who survives this challenge.
So before I ask more about the title of the book deriving from this story and translation and a bit of that, I do want to ask if at that point, weren't you tempted to create another story so that the book is like 4 pieces in correlation to the Talmudic story? Because like for me, it's like, what? It's missing.
No, I guess if there was another lockdown, maybe, but I had one lockdown, one story, second lockdown, the second part, and then the third lockdown, the third story. I had to finish, the lockdown finished. No, seriously, there are 4 different men in the book, because the husband who dies in the death road is also one of the 4 men who enter the orchard in my mind. So in my mind, I have 4 different people entering this orchard of attraction, and I didn't feel the urge to add one more. Maybe, who knows? Maybe I'll do a sequel.
And you chose to title the book in Hebrew, at least, just so you can see. It's called Gever Nichnas B'Pardes, a man walks into the orchard, and that doesn't translate into the English, where you chose to give it a different title. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that, and then maybe I'll ask more about the translation.
Actually, it doesn't translate to any language. The book was translated to 5. No, I think now it's 6 languages, and in none of the languages they were able to bring the pardes in the Talmudic context into the translation of the title. It's impossible, because a man walks into an orchard, loses the whole depth of the Hebrew nouns. So in Italy, which is my second literary home, my home away from home, they chose to translate it Levir del Eden, the ways of Eden. In a way, the Pardes could be also Eden, paradise. Paradise and Pardes are close phonetically. So this was the Italian solution. The Dutch solution I did not understand till this day. Slovakian solution was something like the way things went on. And inside information was actually my suggestion, because I felt while other thrillers, you get the answers from reality, from things that the detective or the characters, they find evidence. In this story, all the answers come from inside. It's inside information. It's from your soul, from your dreams, from your memories. All the answers come from within. And because of that, inside information. And yes, this is the only language that it's called inside informations, but who knows? Maybe we'll see more inside informations in other languages.
So can you say also a little more about how you work with the translators, how involved you are, and what are the things that you find most important? What were there things you noticed other than the title that were lost in translation? Like, how does that process work?
Well, I'll tell you a story that will kind of demonstrate how little control I have over translations of mine in languages that I cannot read. I went to Bucharest, Romania, with the translation of Tre Piani, 3 floors, Tre Etage in Romanian. In English, it's called 3 floors up. And the first question of the journalist, I had this kind of day of interviews, and the first journalist's first question, she asked me, why did you dedicate this book to your son? So I have 3 daughters. So I thought maybe she's drunk, or she's confusing me with Edgar Keret because he has a son. So I kind of ignored the question, and we went on. And then came another journalist, and second question, like, why this book specifically to your son? So okay, so I called the girl from the publishing house, and I asked her, like, what is written here in the dedication page? And she said, to my son. It's like, originally in Hebrew it was to my brother. So I have a son now in Romania, and officially, and of course I asked him to correct that in the next edition, but it got me thinking, like, who knows what happens in my translation to Japanese? Like, how can I know? Slovakian, Japanese, Ukrainian, I have no way of knowing. I can read Spanish. I really love Spanish, and I speak Spanish. I can read Spanish. I can read Arabic. And like slowly, I'm getting to Italian. In like an article of mine was published today in an Italian newspaper on the situation in Israel right now, and I could actually follow the titles. English is the only translation I can actually go over, and we are solving. It's actually problem solving. We are working together to find out a way to bridge cultural issues. I think in inside information there was not a lot of bridging needed, but sometimes there are completely Israeli terms. I'll give you an example. Like, actually, it was from yesterday. I wrote an article, and in the article, I mentioned the word shakshuka. How many of you know what is shakshuka? Raise your hand. Okay. Wow. This is a shakshuka loving community. So my translator to Italian, she says, she texts me. We work very closely together. She texts me. She said, Italians don't know what is shakshuka. Can I just say omelette? And we had this whole discussion about omelette or shakshuka. How crucial is it for my war journal to mention a shakshuka? We decided to go for omelette. And so I have these discussions with my English translator, Sondra Silverstone. She's really good. She captures my music. And in this specific book, besides the title, we didn't have big issues. It's a kind of universal book. Some of my books are completely Israeli, rooted in every moment of the story. You feel Israeli. In inside information and 3 floors up, I think they are more universal, and then there's not a lot of cultural bridging needed to be done.
I just noticed that in this book, there isn't a dedication.
I ran out of dedications, you know.
No way.
I dedicated books to all my daughters. Each one of them got a book. My wife twice, my parents once, my friends, like, who else? Like, I think it's pathetic to dedicate a book to your agent. I see some people, some writers do it. So now actually I have a new book in Hebrew. It's called Hungry Heart, and I dedicated it to my parents again, because now they are 82 and 81, and I thought to myself, wow, maybe, I don't know, like, I hope they will, they will live forever, but maybe I should take into consideration the fact that most of the friends are not alive anymore, and maybe I should kind of take this opportunity. So I dedicated Hungry Heart to my parents again, and let's see what happens in the next book. Like, who would I dedicate the book to?
So we're nearing the end, and I kind of want to ask you something that is also connected to the fact that you're very much a teacher and someone that guides people in writing. In the last story, the disappearing character is also writing stories. And I was wondering, he writes stories in a very specific format. And I was wondering if you had to give one writing exercise, what would that be?
Wow. I'll share the exercise that I'm giving now in our writing. It's not even a course. It's like an open space for writing for people who are devastated, post-traumatic, sad, lonely. So I've been working with two exercises. One is to describe, like you are portraying a picture, like it's a picture, you're taking a photo, but in words, of a graceful moment. Within all this chaos and all this trauma, find a moment that was graceful. Someone did something generous. Someone was helping. Someone was hugging. Someone was kissing. Someone was returning home. Find a moment of grace and describe it in details. This is one exercise I'm giving, and there's another exercise which I think could work well in every Jewish community, because we always feel guilty. So it's a very liberating exercise, and actually I do it in a group. We do it in a group. It's called like writing a poem, a group poem, and everyone has to contribute one sentence that begins with the words, "It's okay that I am. It's okay that I'm sad. It's okay that I'm crying. It's okay that I am in Cyprus. It's okay that I don't want to come back to Israel. It's okay that I don't want to talk with my parents, even though it's wartime. It's okay that." And then people can get rid of their guilt, which is impossible for Jews, but at least for a moment. And then at the end of the exercise, you have like 150 "it's okay that I" sentences, and the accumulative effect is really liberating. So yeah, this is what I've been doing right now, and the next time we talk, I'll have a completely different exercise.
Eshkol, thank you so much. And I must say that also for me, and especially these days, this is a beautiful way to end.